Hello and welcome back to Indie Rebel, the podcast for independent filmmakers. My name is Christopher Temple, and first off, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone that listened to the pilot episode last week, where I talked about how I made my first feature film for $600, and especially a big shout out and thank you to those of you that have subscribed and followed to this podcast, either on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So shout out to you guys, and yeah, we're back, and we're going to have some more fun. Today's topic is going to be about how I've produced and am producing my current feature-length film. You know, it's now 2025. It's a far cry from 2007. Technology has changed, techniques have changed, and I like to think I've gotten a little bit better as a filmmaker, and so that's what we're going to cover today. Fair warning, there's going to be a little bit of a Christian slant to this episode, and that's because the movie in question is a controversial Christian film. And it is controversial, but it is still a Christian movie, and so there's going to be some talk about that kind of stuff because you can't make a Christian film without talking about it. So if that's not your cup of tea, go ahead and just jump off right now. We'll see you back next week where we won't be talking about that. But I do think that there's a lot to learn from this. And it's neat to really do a compare and contrast between where I started and where I'm at right now. And so that's why we're covering this today. So to recap a little bit about how I got here, I mentioned last week that I have a background in horror films. And that's where I got my start. That's where I cut my teeth. And I was still considering myself a Christian. I'd grown up going to church every Sunday and reading my Bible and stuff. But to me, movies were simply a form of entertainment. And I didn't have a problem with doing the whole horror film thing and straight up horror, slasher flicks and that kind of a thing. And it was while I was writing a sequel to my first feature, it was called Wolf 2, The Feeding Continues, that I kind of had a challenge given to me. I've been dating a girl whose family held very different beliefs from mainstream Christianity. And they had asked me about, what I wanted to do with my life and stuff. And I said, I want to make movies. What kind of movies do you want to make? And knowing that they were Christian and very hardcore about it, I said, well, someday I want to make a movie about Revelation. You've got all these beasts and all these creatures covered with eyes. It could be a Christian horror film. It'd be really cool. And her parents then asked me, well, what do you believe about Revelation in the last days? And of course, being the good Sunday-going Christian that I was, I spouted off all the Left Behind theology. And I won't get too much into that. That's not important to this podcast. But, if you read the Left Behind books or you've seen the movies, that's what I believed at the time. And the parents looked at each other and looked back at me and said, go read your Bible and then tell us what you believe. I was like, what are you guys talking about? Like, everybody believes this. You guys are, total whack jobs, whatever. But I did decide to take it to heart. Girl and I broke up, and I believe the entire purpose of that relationship was really just to meet her parents and get that encouragement to read my Bible for myself without any preconceived notions. So I'm going about my life, and it pretty much consisted of go to work, and I was working at a call center, come home, and then I would spend a couple hours writing my new horror film script. And then I would put the laptop away and I'd pull out the Bible and begin my Bible study before going to bed. And it was doing this one night that I began to come to some very interesting revelations, no pun intended, about the last days. And it was in Matthew chapter 24. And I kept seeing this phrase, then. And it was like, after the tribulation, then the Son of Man appears. And I couldn't get over this after then. And I began to realize that what I'd been taught in churches wasn't matching up with what I was finding in Scripture. And so one night, I'd been working hard on my new horror film script. I put the laptop away. I pull out my Bible. I began to study. And I was just overcome by a wave of emotion. I can't even describe it, but I just broke down bawling my eyes out. And I began to just, talk to God as if he was right there with me in the room. I said, okay, I get it. You don't want me making these horror films anymore. And I said, but I really love making movies. If it be your will, I make movies. Give me a movie to make for you. And I went to bed that night and I woke up the next morning with this idea in my head to combine the art of parkour, which I'd been doing for like a year and a half at this point, And I know parkour is not a big thing anymore, but most people have heard of it and probably know what it is. To combine parkour with what I was finding in my Bible studies, because what I was finding was so different from mainstream Christianity. And I was like, wow, this could actually be a really cool film premise. And the other thing I decided with this was I wanted to tell the story from a personal rather than political point of view. I didn't want to do what Left Behind did and focusing on the government stuff that leads into the last days, but more so, how does the last days affect a small group of people that we've been following throughout the whole thing? Now, originally, I wanted to tell the story from beginning it to end, picking up in present day and leading up to the second coming of Jesus. And I realized very quickly that I would not have the budget to do such a thing. And so I decided to backtrack, and I said, well, maybe I'll tell kind of the first act of that, the first part of the story, which is present day up to the beginning of the last days. And so that's what I set out to do. I was able to produce this film for $200. We shot it on a Canon ZR-800, which is a consumer level mini DV camera, standard definition, shot 30 frames a second. So, I mean, pretty standard for consumer video at the time, but far from Hollywood standards when it comes to, production equipment. While I was in post-production for that movie, doing all the ADR and the sound effects, which we did the same way we did on Wolf, where, it was all ADR for all the audio and stuff, I was working on a sequel script as well called Leap Rise of the Beast. And we actually shot a little proof of concept for it. I was able to borrow a high definition camera. It was my first time ever shooting in HD. And we went around the back streets of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and a little bit in Spokane, Washington, and shot this little proof of concept of the opening scene. And when I finished the first film, Leap, I tagged the opening scene of the second one, our little proof of concept, to the end of it. And we had a screening at a local movie theater up in Newport, Washington. After the movie was over, I had a lot of people come up to me and say, yeah, your movie was good, but what you're doing next looks really, really good. I can't wait to see that one. And that gave me a lot of excitement. I'm like, okay, we can do this. So I finished the script now for Rise of the Beast. During that time, I sold DVDs of the first Leap movie, and I was able to sell my little $200 movie. We sold 200 copies on DVDs, and I sold the DVDs for $10 a piece, so we made $2,000, which is awesome. I took that $2,000 and bought a Canon Rebel T2i. This is a DSLR still photography camera that had a video function. And here's what really sold me on the T2i. It had a sensor the same size as motion picture 35mm film. So aesthetically, just looking at an image, it's going to have more of a Hollywood look to it. It's shot in high definition at 24 frames per second, which is what all the Hollywood movies are done at. And so I was really excited to have a, quote unquote cinema camera now that I could go shoot my next movie with. And we were actually, fun fact, the first feature-length film completed on a Canon Rebel T2i. We were the first feature film shot with just the kit lens, the 18 to 55mm kit lens, because I couldn't afford another lens. That was it. And we produced this thing. The rest of the money went to food. It went to gas for the actors, a couple of cheap props, some cheap work lights. I'll talk more about the lighting setup that we had when I do the podcast on independent film lighting, but just know it was very, very low budget, involving halogen work lights and a dollar store shower curtain. And we lit the entire movie that way. So if you go onto my YouTube channel and look up Leap Rise of the Beast, the whole thing is lit with a shower curtain and work lights, which is kind of fun. And we shot this film in the summer of 2010. I then edited it up through the spring of 2011 when we had the premiere. Editing, I do want to talk about real quick on that film, was very cumbersome because I was working on my then 8-year-old computer that I had bought when I graduated high school, and it did not have a lot of power. It could not handle the high definition. And so I had to get really creative and come up with what's called an offline-online workflow. And so I would convert all my raw footage down to 240 pixels high, super, super low quality. I then edited the entire movie at that resolution, and then I took my whole timeline from Sony Vegas, brought it into After Effects CS4, where I conformed the online. And what that means is swapping out those low quality files with the high quality files that came straight out of the camera. And there was a script called Immigration that I bought. It was like $50, but it allowed me to do that process automatically instead of me having to do it all by hand. So that saved a lot of time. We then went ahead and screened Rise of the Beast at that same theater, and the response was huge. I sold DVDs of it, and I began to plan out what my next movie was going to be. Oh, I also want to add, it was Rise of the Beast where I started learning visual effects, because when I wrote that script, I had delusions of grandeur that I was going to have like $100,000 budget and I could really do anything I wanted. And it wasn't until I realized I was having to self-finance the movie that I can't do everything I wanted, and I needed to turn to visual effects to learn how to do it. And so I taught myself Adobe After Effects in the spring leading up to shooting, so that by the time we began filming, I had a rough idea of about 5 or 6 basic effects that I could do to help elevate the film. So we had some green screens, there was an explosion, muzzle flashes with shells kicking out, and then also bullet wounds and monitor screen replacements. So all the computer monitors and the bad guy hub, that's all done with visual effects. And that was my repertoire. I'm like, okay, I can do these effects. That will allow me to do the movie. And there was a few other things I hadn't planned on that we were able to throw into it too. But for me, this was really the beginning of doing visual effects in my films and learning to lean on them not as a crutch, but as a tool to help tell the story that I wanted to tell. Because by learning visual effects, I was now able to dream bigger and tell bigger movies and bigger stories. Fast forward about a year, I am now living in Montana. I'm basically homeless. I'm living out of a camper trailer on some friend's property. And I was using the internet connection, and I'm writing at this time Leap 3. And at the time I was calling it Leap Revelation. And it was a direct sequel to the previous film. I figured the budget was going to have to be at least $20,000, but more than likely, $50,000 to $100,000. It was a bigger movie. I also was tired of having a complete volunteer cast. Like, I wanted to actually pay people what they're worth and pay them for their time. I wanted a few crew members, and they were going to cost money too. And so that's what inflated this budget. And I tried everything I could to try to get the funds. I tried crowdfunding, which, by the way, crowdfunding does not work unless you really already have a huge fan base and following for either the subject matter or for yourself personally. If you are a social media influencer and you've got 100,000 followers, you might have a chance at crowdfunding a project. If you've produced a film before that has a huge following, you might be able to crowdfund your next project, but not always. Not my first, but the last Leap movie, Leap Rise of the Beast, has over 1.5 million views on YouTube. I've got 22,000 subscribers, and I tried fundraising my new version of Leap 3, and I couldn't do it. I was able to raise like $1,000 start to finish, and that was it. So crowdfunding, I do not believe works, and again, unless you have a big following already behind you. So I write the movie. I try to get the funding, no funding at all. Almost a decade goes by, and during this time frame, about halfway into that, I lost all my equipment. I lost my house, everything in a house fire, including my dog, which was the most devastating part of that. That was in 2015. I'm working for a small ministry down in Idaho now called Layman Ministries, where we're producing a documentary series called The Days of Noah. And you can actually go find this on Amazon if you want to go watch it now. But what was really cool about this is that by being the visual effects supervisor, I got to learn a lot more about visual effects. When I was brought onto the project, I was using After Effects, and I did a couple shots in After Effects, but then realized very quickly that After Effects couldn't handle the types of shots that the director was wanting to do. And so I had to go to town. I said, okay, how does Hollywood do stuff? And I learned they used a program called Nuke. And so I started teaching myself Nuke. And Nuke is a node-based compositing program. And we'll talk about that in another episode of this podcast too, about layer-based versus node-based compositing. But at the end of the day, After Effects works like Photoshop. You're just stacking things on top of each other. Whereas Nuke and Fusion, for that matter, which you can get for free inside DaVinci Resolve, Node-based compositors are you're building a flowchart. You're taking data, you're doing something to the data, and then you're combining data streams together. And at first, it's a very convoluted way to work when you're not familiar with it. But once it clicks and you wrap your head around it, it is a million times easier than layer-based compositing. And you can do infinitely more things in your composite than you could ever dream of with layer-based compositing. So it really does free you to truly do whatever you want to do. I got married in the fall of 2020. My wife and I moved back out to Montana during the pandemic, and I started my own business called Pyro Studios. And it's just a video production company where I do commercials and other advertising work for clients. I have clients coast to coast, everyone from Seattle, Chicago. I've even done stuff for people back in New York State. So it kind of spans the entire U.S. And it was during this time in 2022, I think it was, that my wife and I were sitting outside on our balcony one Saturday morning, and we had a little fire pit out there, a little gas fire pit, propane fire. And we're sitting around the fire, and I said, I miss filmmaking, feature filmmaking. Making videos for clients is great and it pays the bills, but I miss telling stories, narrative stories. And I really want to maybe revisit the Leap universe again. I don't know if I want to tackle that feature right now, but tell something that's in that same storyline. And my wife looked at me and said, are you sure that's still the story you want to tell? And I kind of thought about it for a second, like, what do you mean? She's like, well, your last two Leap movies are kind of plucky and campy. You got these kids taking on the forces of evil. I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's kind of like Spy Kids in that regard. Man, I've grown a lot since then. It's been 10 years since I've done this. My views have changed, and what I think makes a good movie has changed. I should look at maybe doing something different. Because you got to realize, I was sitting on that script, Leap Revelation, for literally 10 years and had not been able to make it yet. So we kind of discussed a couple different key plot points and things, and I took my notes and I began to write a new script completely from scratch. I did retain some of the previous elements from the previous film, or the previous script, I should say, but overall it was going to be a whole new story with a new cast of characters. Because at this point, 10 years later, none of my previous cast looked like they did in that second movie anymore. And they've all moved on with their lives. They've gone on to bigger and better things, started their own families. And it's one thing when you're in your early 20s and everyone's, running around making movies because you really don't have any other commitments. But when you have a family, it changes things. And it's a lot harder to get away and commit to a project like this. And so I said, okay, I need a whole new cast of characters. And I wanted the movie to kind of go back to basics and back to the roots of the first one, where I said, okay, we want to tell the story from a personal point of view. And one of the key aspects of that, even from the first drafts of Leap 3, was I wanted to focus on family. What happens if you wake up one morning and your spouse is covered in sores because the plagues have begun, and you now realize that you're on opposite sides of the equation? How does that play out? What if you've got a family member that wants to hunt you down and kill you because of your beliefs? The Bible talks about that. And I'm like, this is what's interesting to me, and this is what I wanted to explore. And so I wrote a very gritty and more mature script taking these things into account. And overall, just very, very, very realistic. And I wrote it in Final Draft 11. The reason for that was because there's a beat board in there. And that was a really nice way of organizing your film ahead of time on kind of these virtual index cards and connecting beats and plot points. I could color code things for different meanings. So Final Draft was really a big help in the pre-production phase of writing the script. It took me quite a few months to write the first draft. I started writing it in March of 2022. It was finished in October of 2022, so quite a few months. And then I spent the next 6 months or whatever until we ended up shooting. Actually, it was about 9 months until we started shooting, just refining the script and going through the different revisions and changing things and really making it a good, solid story. And the story was the most important thing to me with this. When it came time to think about money and financing the film, I decided to just completely self-finance it from scratch. I did have a few donations come in from people. Um, like one guy donated $500. I had somebody donate $100 here and there, and so all those people are in the credits of the film. But for the most part, it was self-financed. I will not go into the budget right now because I'm still in the process of getting this thing ready for distribution and such. And I will talk numbers with the distributors, but there's no need to spoil that at the moment. But it is still very low budget. But it is a very high budget look, if that makes sense. Like visually, it looks like a larger budget film and looks like we had a lot of money to put the thing together, which is cool. I ended up building a custom computer in anticipation of getting ready to do this. So in May of 2023, just a few months before production began, I did a video for the local Chamber of Commerce, and the payday on that was quite substantial. And so I took that money and built a custom PC from scratch. Let's talk about computers really quick here. I use Windows, Mac, and Linux regularly. I use Linux as kind of a networking, and anytime I need to screw with hard drives and reformat them properly, I use Linux for that. My daily computer is a M2 MacBook Air. That's what I run my business off of, as far as invoicing clients and any pre-production scripts, scheduling, budgeting, all that kind of stuff. That's all done off my MacBook. And then I have a Windows 10 computer workhorse that handles all the heavy lifting for 4K RAW editing and that kind of stuff. The graphics card was donated by a friend and former coworker. He was upgrading to the 4090 series, and so he donated his 3090 to me for this computer, which was really cool. And then I bought an i9 processor and 64 gigs of RAM, and that is kind of the heart of that custom machine. For comparison, my previous computer was an HP Z800, which was, state of the art back in 2010. But when I bought it in 2015, it was already starting to show its age and only had a 6 gig 1060 graphics card on it. I had a shot that I rendered. It was all CG done in Blender. My HP Z800 took 14 hours to render the 717 frames. My new custom built PC takes an hour to render the exact same sequence. So it is screaming fast, night and day difference. Casting, let's talk about casting real quick. In the past, I had always used Craigslist to cast a film, and it worked out well. But Craigslist now, at least out here in Montana, was pretty much dead. And so I did a little bit of research and found Backstage.com. I created an account, and they let me post my ad totally for free without charging me. And I had over 200 replies in just a matter of days from all over the world of people that wanted to be in this controversial Christian film. And that was really exciting to me. Two of the replies ended up being somewhat local. There was a girl that lives in Kalispell, which is part of the Flathead Valley, about 30 minutes away from where I live and where we were going to be filming. And so I did an interview with her, a little screen test, and cast her as the part of Liz. And then I had a guy reach out to me, college-age kid from Moscow, Idaho, which is about 5.5, 6 hours away. And he did well too. And so I was like, okay, well, these are going to be my actors. I'm going to have to bring him out no matter what, but at least the girl is local. Talking to you about actors real quick, when I wrote this, I wanted to make sure that there was a character that everybody could latch onto. And so you've got your main college kid who's trying to get his parents to realize that, hey, I'm a senior in college. Like, I don't need mom and dad helping me every step of the way anymore. And so he's trying to become his own man and figure out what he believes and what his life is going to be about. You've got the father figure who kind of understands that to a degree, but also is very much into doing what's right for the better good of society and going along with that. And so he and his son start butting heads a little bit. And then you've got the mother who's torn between her love for her husband and the love for her son. And so she's kind of the mediator, middle ground type character. And then you've got the girlfriend who introduces the college son to new beliefs and really kind of shares some things with him that becomes the catalyst for the story. And so, again, like I said, I think anybody can relate to any of these characters. Like, there's going to be somebody that you latch onto. You're like, oh, yeah, I can see where she's coming from or he's coming from. And that was done intentionally to really make the film more accessible to a lot of people. So now, this is crazy. I want to share this story real quick. I am 2 days away from beginning production. My actor is supposed to come out the very next day from Idaho, him and his brother. He was going to bring his brother along to be my one and only crew member. It's somebody that can help me out behind the scenes, both in terms of taking photos and video, but also running, sound and moving lights around and all that kind of stuff. So we're 2 days before shooting begins, and I don't have my parents cast yet, and I'm missing about half my locations. I needed the parents' house. I needed, oh gosh, what else did I need? I was looking for a restaurant location. I didn't have that totally locked in yet. And there was a cabin location I needed too. The house and the cabin were the two biggies I didn't have. And so, being Christian film and believing in God, I took it to prayer. And I said, all right, God, here's the deal. I need, by the end of the day today, if you don't want me to make the film, I need you to have my lead actor call me up and say he cannot do the film. And if you do want me to do the film, by the end of the day today, I need both parents cast, I need the parents' house, and I need the cabin. I don't know how you're going to work this out, but I'm challenging you on this, God. And by the end of the day, I had my parents cast and I had both locations that I needed. And here's how that happened. I put out an ad on a local Facebook group. I don't have a personal Facebook page anymore, but I do have a page for my business. And so through the business, I got involved with the local bulletin board. I posted, hey, I'm shooting a small little independent film here in the next couple of weeks. I'm looking for two parents kind of in their 50s. And, that was it. I just left it at that. I wasn't even looking about the locations yet. I figured, let's just see if I can find the parents. Got a response from a husband and wife couple that were interested. I met with them later that afternoon. I did a screen test. They read through the lines. They did a really good job. And here's the beauty of it. They are property managers locally out here in the area and had access to the cabin location and a location that was perfect for the parents' house. It was a lake house, actually. And I'm like, wow. So I ended up killing two birds with one stone by casting these individuals who did a great job. And they were able to bring the locations to the table. And like I mentioned in the last podcast, I always try to cast first before I get locations because you never know what you're going to get out of it. I've gotten bars and other locations in the past. Well, now here I get my key locations that I needed, and they were absolutely beautiful. They look stunning on film. And they, as a natural husband and wife, a real husband and wife, are able to not have to act that in the film because they really are married. They really do live together and all this. Like it was so natural, and they were so good and so natural together. And God answered that prayer. And I actually told my actor this when he showed up. I'm like, yeah, I wasn't sure if you're going to make it. He goes, why not? And I told him about my challenge to God and then how this all played out. He goes, wow, that's really cool. So now we're into production. 19 days shoot is what it took to put this thing together. It was the most equipment I've ever had on a feature-length film, and I owned all of it. There was about $15,000 worth of equipment that I had acquired since the house fire in 2015. I had an actual cinema camera from Blackmagic Design. We shot this on the Ursa Mini 4K. We shot it in 4K RAW, and RAW means that you can actually go back and change your sensor settings later on in the edit. So if you need to fix your white balance or fix your exposure, you can do all that without degrading your image. So that was really cool. So shot it RAW. I had a whole bunch of new lighting. I had flags and C-stands. I had LED panels. I had big softboxes. I had an LED softbox. It's like 4 feet in diameter. Huge, huge movie light. I had a microphone and XLR cables and a boom pole and boom holder. I had an audio recorder. I had a drone. I had special effects makeup, of course. And all this really enabled me to truly tell the story that I wanted to tell and make the best looking film that I've ever made in my life, which is cool. This was also my first time recording sound live on set for a feature film. I'd practiced with it doing some short films. And this takes me back to, don't just make a feature and try to get all the gear you need for the feature, like make a bunch of short films first to learn how all your gear works and how it plays together and start to refine a solid workflow. But yeah, we recorded sound on set. I toyed with recording sound into my audio recorder. I have a Zoom H4n, but I ultimately decided that it would be faster and easier to just record the audio directly into the camera. And so that's what I did. I hooked my microphone into the XLR cable or XLR ports of the camera via an XLR cable. And so all the sound was synchronized to picture right out of the gate, which is cool. Now, you may think that, hey, having a good script and great locations and a great cast and all this amazing gear, what can go wrong, right? Like nothing's going to go wrong. It's all going to go perfect and it's going to be smooth sailing. Not the case. Things were constantly going wrong on the shoot. But when they went wrong, we had a policy to just stop, work the problem, work the solution, and it always turned out better because of it. Whether it be a filming location, such as there was a scene that I wanted to take place in a restaurant. Couldn't find the restaurant that would let us do it, or that at least had the right look for that. And so then we said, well, maybe we'll do it in a park. We scouted a couple parks, still didn't have the right look. Finally, we shot it on a dock at the lake house. We were filming the parents' house, and it was absolutely magnificent and beautiful. And we shot it at sunrise to be like sunset, so you had all the beautiful colors in the sky and everything, and it was way better than if we'd shot it in a restaurant. We had a day where I did not shoot a single frame of film. It just was not working. We're doing the rehearsals. It felt awkward. It felt stiff. It wasn't working. Then my actress had to go off and help her husband with something, and so while she was gone, my other actors and I, we rewrote the entire scene from scratch. And then we decided to call it a day because I was getting pissed at this point and was not in the mood to shoot anything. And I knew that if I did try to shoot it that day, I was going to rush and it wasn't going to be the way I wanted it to be. And so we decided to put a hold on things and we'd just start over the next morning. And not only were we able to get caught back up and the rest of the day went great, but the scene, again, turned out better than we had originally planned. Now, here's another cool God story for you. One day we're filming in a cemetery, because there's a funeral in the film, and I don't want to say who died yet. You have to watch the movie to find out. But we're filming in a cemetery, and we start seeing sprinklers go off in the distance. And in the back of my head, myself and my team are thinking, okay, we're going to have to, at some point, grab all of our gear and move out of the way when the sprinklers make their way to where we are, because it was kind of like a big clock. Like this quadrant would go off, and then the next quadrant would go off, and then the next quadrant would go off, and they'd run for about 10 minutes at a time. Well, now the quadrant right next to us begins to go off. I'm like, okay, here we go. We need to get ready. We need to wrap up here, guys. So we're trying to bust out what we needed to shoot. And just as I'm starting to grab gear, that quadrant stops. I'm thinking, oh crap, we're about to get wet and my camera's about to die. But something miraculous happened. I don't know how else to describe it. It was a miracle. Instead of our quadrant going off like it was supposed to, it skipped us, and the next quadrant to our other side went off. I've never heard of that happening with a sprinkler system, because, I mean, these things are computer controlled. And I had no idea. I had no idea where the control box is for the stuff. I hadn't gone and researched out how the sprinklers work and everything to know that, hey, this quadrant will be safe. It just all worked out. That here they're going off on the right side, they stop, and now they're going off on our left side, leaving us completely dry and unscathed by the wrath of the mighty sprinklers. So just really cool stuff like that was happening constantly over the production of the film. Our longest shoot day was about 8 hours, and that was a day where we shot in the afternoon, and then we took a break, and then we actually filmed into the evening and into the night because I needed darkness for it. Our average shoot day, I would say, though, was really only about 6 hours. And that worked out really well because it meant that some of my actors could go off and still do their work and their day jobs and things. And we were still able to work around them and stay on schedule. Whereas with the previous film, I had to shoot on nights and weekends predominantly to work around schedules. We were and also spread stuff out. We shot this whole movie in one go. It was 19 days solid, taking only Saturdays off as a break. And it worked out well for us. Also want to give here a huge shout out to Roman's brother, Tiernan. Roman's the actor that plays the main college kid in the movie. His brother came to help me out behind the scenes, and really, really big help. He was holding the boom. He was moving lights around. Also did a lot of behind the scenes stuff, a lot of behind the scenes photos. He helped Roman with his hair and makeup. So Tiernan, huge shout out to you for being my right-hand man on the production. I definitely realized I need more people. I'll talk about that here during the wrap-up in just a few minutes. But even just having him was amazing. It was nice not having everything completely on my shoulders. All right, talking about post-production. Movie was filmed in 4K RAW 4:1, and I was able to edit the whole movie online this time, meaning at the full resolution quality inside of DaVinci Resolve. DaVinci Resolve started life as a color grading suite, but now it offers editing and visual effects and sound mixing as well. It really is a all-in-one program. And I had planned to actually cut this in Avid Media Composer. I've been using Avid since 2015. I love Avid. I love the way it makes you think about editing. I've even got the cool, light up Avid keyboard with all the colored keys and stuff that you see in the behind the scenes of movies. That looks really cool. I've got that. And when we were done shooting, I started cutting a teaser trailer for the film right away. I cut it in Avid. I brought the edit into DaVinci to online it. And for the first time ever, things were not lining up. Like I would go to conform it, and it's an automatic process. You shouldn't have to manually do things, but it was linking to the wrong media files. It wasn't coming in right, and I had to go through and manually relink everything. And I said, screw this. If I have to relink an entire feature film shot by shot, I'm going to go insane. And so I said, I wonder if I can start this inside of DaVinci and do the whole movie in DaVinci. And I did. It took me 3 months to get my first cut. We did the whole thing inside of Resolve, online, full resolution. Well, I say full resolution. My actual master output is 2K, but we're filming in 4K, and that allows me to actually reposition shots a little bit. And there were some scenes where when we were filming, I would purposely shoot them wide, knowing that I could go crop in for close-ups, and it just allowed me to shoot a little bit faster that way. But yeah, it handled it flawlessly. Now, I do have my Resolve configured to work like Avid. I've got custom keyboard shortcuts. I've got the interface set up a certain way and cursor behaviors to work like Avid. So it does feel like I'm editing inside of Avid Media Composer, even though I'm inside of DaVinci Resolve. So I still get the Avid way of thinking, but then all the bonuses of working online in DaVinci, which is really cool. Visual effects, 99% of the compositing was done inside of Nuke X to be specific, because I needed the 3D environments for a lot of stuff. We did a lot of projection mapping and things. I did a few shots inside of the Fusion page of Resolve. All the computer graphics were done with Blender, which is free and open source, and I've been using that for over 20 years now, since I was in high school, and I love it. Music, let's talk about music real quick. I wrote score myself using Mixcraft 9, but there was a lot of other music in the film that either needed to be in the background of shots, or I just wanted, like, there was a few scenes where I wanted like that 2000s Avril Lavigne, Green Day punk rock sound with lyrics and such. And so I came across a AI service online called Suno.com, and for $10 a month, anything I create, I have a license to use in my film. And so I was able to create the punk rock sounds. I created a ripoff of Hotel California for some background music. I did a bunch of other background music like you hear in a thrift store and things, and that was all done with Suno. But the score was written inside of Mixcraft. And then for the end credits, everyone knows that you have Endcrawl, which is kind of the go-to in Hollywood. Problem is Endcrawl costs about $2,000 to get your credits out of it. And I didn't want to spend that kind of money. I also know that if I use a title generator inside of DaVinci, it tends to skip and stutter a little bit. Plus, you can't add graphics to it. If I wanted to add any brand icons and logos to it, I can't do that inside of DaVinci. And so what I did is I did a little searching, and I came across a free program called Cinecred. And the way it works is you enter all your credit data into a spreadsheet, and then Cinecred takes that spreadsheet and makes your really nice professional end credits with it. And you can have logos, and you can have, it's a really, really smooth, like buttery smooth end crawl, which is just awesome. And so I've got now professional looking credits in my movie, and it adds that little bit of extra sauce to it and makes it just a little bit more professional looking, and hopefully will help people take the movie a little more seriously. Because at the end of the day, we didn't spend a lot of money on this. It is a small independent film. Now, talking about what I've learned making this film, I need more people, and I hate saying that because I've always prided myself on being a truly independent filmmaker. But I realized that I need somebody on hair and makeup. I need a dedicated scripty or script supervisor. And I need 2 production assistants, I would say, and probably a full-time sound guy. If I could have just those, 5 or 6 key crew members, that's all I need. I don't need a 100-person crew or even a 50-person crew. Just give me these 6 people, and I think life would be a lot easier and happier for me on a film shoot. I was constantly very stressed on this movie. I mean, I had fun, but I was very stressed the entire time because it was me doing almost everything myself. So that would be something I would like to change moving forward. And really, the key takeaway here is that you can make a professional looking movie pretty much by yourself. If you've got some actors and like one person helping you out, you can do this. But you're going to have to be extremely technical, and you're going to have a solid workflow in place. So practice and practice and practice making short films, because that's the only way you're going to get that workflow dialed in. And it's the only way you're going to truly know what your equipment is capable of, and also what you are in fact capable of. All right, I think that wraps up this episode. That is how I made my most recent feature film. I am in the process of finishing the sound mix on it right now using the Fairlight page inside of DaVinci. And then I have a premiere planned here in about 2 months' time. And on the same day as the premiere, we're going to be releasing this on Amazon and hopefully Tubi as well. So you'll be able to watch it there. I'm not releasing it for free on YouTube yet. That's going to be a couple years down the line. While this is kind of a ministry project for me, I do want to make some money off of it because I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and cash into the film. And I want to be able to make the next movie that I have planned even better. And my next film, all I will say right now is that involves Ouija boards and demons and talking to the dead and stuff like that. Very, very different, but very, very exciting. And I'm working on the script for that right now as I'm finishing up this film. So, yeah, be sure to keep following along. I'll be talking more about it in the podcast and such as, I get closer to getting ready to shoot that one. So, thank you so much for listening. My name is Christopher Temple, and you've been listening to Indie Rebel, the podcast for independent filmmakers.